Good morning. Committee of the Whole is returned from recess. My colleagues, as you will note up above here, we have the clock now, so there won't be any debate of the time. You'll see when they started, when you start your question, and they'll pause it when the question has been ready given. Okay, and then it will restart after that. We have completed the first round. Send notice to my colleagues that the special fund snapshot should be in your Google Drive. Please make sure you have it. I think it was a couple of the colleagues asked for that. Okay, we will begin now our second round. Keep in mind, 5 minutes each. It doesn't count against the response.
Mr. Chair, can we just have a 2-minute recess just to review the special fund?
All right, okay, we'll give it a few minutes recess so you can review it. All right,
Thank you.
So we're back on recess. Committee of the Whole is back in order. Is called back to order. We will now begin the second round. My colleagues, please be mindful of the clock, because at exactly when the time runs out, I will end the conversation, move on to the next senator. Senator Tello, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, before you start the clock on me, I totally agree, and I think it's prudent that we do allow each senator 5 minutes to talk. However, we may have more questions and ask that maybe with the consensus of the body that we go into a third round if necessary. That's all.
That's something to consider. Thank you. Got 5 minutes to ask your questions and totally get your response. Thank you. Senator Tello, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is to Lester. Lester, during the budget hearings, we had, for instance, public health come into the hearing and mentioned that they're $17 million short from the previous year. They anticipated to use ARP funding to cover the $17 million. Can you tell me if this is the plan of the administration to do so?
I have no comments on the use of ARP funding, ma'am.
So then you won't have any idea about any money that's already been spent with ARP money. Can you at least tell us what fundings have been spent with ARP money currently?
Senator Teitigui, I think Director Byrne provided a summary in connection with Senator Mullen's queries on the account information. I think that will suffice for the administration's discussion on that subject.
Mr. Byrne, during the payment yesterday, or was it yesterday, I'm not sure, but it was mentioned that about $39+ million was spent regarding the adjudication of the war claims. Before that, the government of Guam forked out funding ahead of time, and there was an account that was supposed to be set up to use in that circumstances when it comes to paying out and then getting reimbursed, where the reimbursement goes back into the fund. Well, it's obvious that the administration did not utilize or even open up a fund and put money in there. So my question, Mr. Byrne, is how much of government funds, general fund money, was used to pay out the war claims?
I think I answered that yesterday. We paid out $12.8 million
12?
in war claims, and we received reimbursements of $12.8 million.
Okay, where did you take the money from? The $12.8 million from the general fund? You said you took it from the general fund, but what agency? In other words, maybe you can ask this question. The $12 million that was taken out of the general fund from whatever agency you took it out of, were they all reimbursed? Was that $12 million reimbursed back to that agency?
It wasn't allocated to any agency. We took out 12.8 from the general fund, and 12.8 was replaced in the general fund.
You took out 12.8, right? Okay, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that again? It's a little bit...
12.8 cash was withdrawn from the general fund, and it was shown as a federal receivable, so it didn't affect any agency. And when the federal funds reimbursement funds were received, it was offset against that receivable.
Okay. The next question I have with regards to special funds. Well, we all believe there is going to be a shortfall in the special funds, and thank you for this information, providing it to us. It's looking at about $18,890,000 in shortfall so far. And of course, you know, the next months in these areas are probably not going to shoulder any difference as far as a shortfall. So, has the administration, up to this time, used any funding to cover any of these shortfalls that the special fund was used to accommodate the agencies?
Senator, I think Mr. Carlson mentioned yesterday that there were 2 months where the general fund had to advance money to the Tourist Attraction Fund to pay the appropriate debt service. Other than that, the whole purpose of a special fund is that the revenues are dedicated to a particular purpose. So there would be no subsidy from the general fund to a special fund. I think Mr. Carlson also mentioned that there was some money used exceptionally in order to subsidize the customs fund because we still have an ongoing need to pay for customs officers. But that's all.
Where did that funding come from?
From the general fund.
Well, you had to take it out from somewhere else. Where did you take it? What agency fell short? Because everything is appropriated.
No agency was short. It's shown as a receivable between the two funds.
That doesn't make sense, Mr. Burns. If we appropriated in FY21 certain fundings and it falls short, you're going to have to pull from some other agency or where we funded to cover that shortfall, especially customs and quarantine. So where did you get that funding from?
Senator, it makes sense to me. Please don't forget that.
Well, I'm sure it does when you're able to move money around like, cups under, rocks under a cup, but we're trying to understand this. So if you can simplify it, and even for the listening audience, to simplify the explanation, where did you get the funding to cover these shortfalls? I mean, what agency fell short because you weren't able to? No
agency fell short. I can't quite understand your graphic explanation of cups and things, but no agency fell short. An appropriation isn't always used until the end of the year. So there's always money available, there's always money in reserve in order to cover these types of expenditures. And would you not want there to be an availability of this expenditure to cover the customs requirements, or do we have to explain to the customs officers that we can't pay them because there aren't the funds available?
No, but it would be nice if you explained to us where you got the money to cover the shortfall.
From the general fund.
Right, but you had to have taken it from somewhere. Let me move on, because it's obvious you're not going to answer my question. The pharmaceutical fund, I'll save that to last one. Okay, the Education Stable Fund gave no, that was the 9,000, okay. These funds that were used for the ESF, that was given to University of Guam, GFD, and Office of the Attorney General, as well as, I think there might have been one more agency that was given. This funding that was provided for them, is there anything in your budget request for those agencies or to offset this additional money? Like, for instance, GFD, you gave $1.7 million to GFD from the ESF money, and is there anything in the budget that offsets this funding?
Senator Tydegui, are you referring to the Education Stabilization Fund TAP grant?
Yes, the ESF.
Okay, that's a TAP grant. It's a federal source of money that was provided through the ARP or CARES Act. Mm-hmm. And the allocation of some of those federal funds likely did go where you say they went, but it was in line with the application for the grant money that was received, and therefore, it's federal monies that were used to support a program. So, and I'll remind you, with all due respect, this is not our budget. And to go back to your question on customs, on page 86 of the FY21 budget, the legislature did appropriate $7,335,835 from the general fund for customs. Mm-hmm. So when you ask Mr. Byrne where it came from, he tells you general fund. Please remember that this body understood the customs shortfall and supported it generously from the general fund, and is doing the same thing in the substitute bill. But yet he tells you general fund, Well, it was appropriated, ma'am.
Yeah, but Lester, this money that's in the Customs and Quarantine Special Fund is not trailing the amount that's needed. And I just wanted to ask, how were you able to subsidize? And how are you able to subsidize all these shortfalls in the special funds that are coming up? We're looking at 18 million right now. How are you going to subsidize them? I know my time is almost up, so.
I'll forward you the answer, ma'am, because this body for FY21 provided general fund funding, understanding full well exactly what you just said. So thank you all for understanding that. Thank you for providing general fund funding for customs. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, but like I said, we are coming into a shortfall in the special fund, and some of the money that was appropriated to these agencies was general fund money and special fund money, so they're going to be a shortfall. So my question is, how is the administration, and according to her, the governor, which we heard last week in her press conference, that she is going to be able to subsidize FY 2021 or 2022. And Lester, you were in that press conference, and you said the same thing, reiterated what she said. So is the governor going to subsidize the shortfalls in the special fund for 2021 with ARP money? Because she said she was going to use ARP money. Nestor from KUAM brought it up. Are you going to use ARP money for that? And she said, yes, absolutely. So is that true to the course?
We haven't passed the budget yet, so I don't know whether or not there will be any shortfalls in 2022, or if, as Mr. Byrne continually mentions, we're not done with the fiscal year yet. So I don't know whether or not there are any shortfalls in fiscal 21.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we all know there's going to be. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tuttle. Senator Frank Blas, do you have any questions for the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how we're going to, quite simply, how we're going to get to where we want to go with what we got. And I hope that you can appreciate that in light of even the presentation provided by Mr. Hiles on economic outlook and what we see on a day-to-day basis is, as to how we continue to struggle, is how we're going to get to where we need to go, not knowing full well how all the money that we're going to be receiving or that we have received is anticipated to be spent. And Mr. Carlson, I can appreciate and I understand full well you may not have the authority to speak about ARP funding. But that said is that for me to be able to reconcile, whether it be your budget submission or OFB's budget submission, is this 800-pound gorilla in the room is actually a $603 million question. And surely, within the last few months, there was some anticipation as to how it's going to be spent. I don't necessarily have a question, but a concern and a comment that I hope that sometime between now and when we close the books on whether or not we're going to pass this budget, that information is shared. And so I ask, please, that sometime during the course of this day or before these discussions, and go back to the boss and ask her if you can release the information as to how this is going to be spent. Because we know it's going to be. But I don't want to play this guessing game, especially when it comes to the future and the lives of our economy and our people. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to yield the rest of my time to the minority leader when it comes up. That's 2 minutes and 8 seconds. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Your time has been yielded to the Minority Leader, Senator Dueñas. Senator Pito Terlay, do you have any questions for the panel?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yesterday, I talked about some of the notation that was placed down on the fiscal FY2022 general funds, and I just want to credit Steve for his presentation or his report. I'm pretty confident that the general fund is, let me just say that I'm comfortable with the general fund. Now, going back to the special fund, I have several issues with the special fund because, you know, when you take a look at the FY 2021 budget, and it indicates the 210,717,690 versus the report from FY 2022 OFB level. They came out with 196,705,694. And if you take a look at that, we're looking at at least 14 million difference. Right, Steve? And then when you go into the fiscal year 2022 executive request, which is 202,656,092 versus the level that was presented by reported by OFB, it's the 196 million plus. When you take a look at that, we're actually facing a deficit of at least 5 million, right, Steve, if I'm correct? Now, if you really look at the whole scenario of the budget request for 2021 fiscal year 2022 versus the 2022 OFB report, if I'm right, we're only facing like 20 million deficit. I don't know, close to 20 million deficit. And I want to ask Stephen, is that close enough? And I think you had mentioned 20 million, and I came out with that calculation on my presentation for the special funds.
Yes, Senator, when you talk about a deficit, right now it's about a $20 million shortfall in the 6 major special fund categories. That doesn't include the other minor categories, special funds that we do actually monitor. So you're right, currently right now with the 6 major special funds, we are tracking 20 million less than what was projected.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all that I wanted to bring up. And like I said, I'm comfortable with the general fund presentation, but I have some doubts on the, like what Stephen had mentioned, the 20 million deficit. So we're going to have to work things out as we go on with this budget. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Senator Clint, do you have a question, sir, for the panel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the Department of Revenue Tax. Do you guys have any sort of estimate with regards to tax refunds, particularly for those who qualify for EITC? Do they typically file before April 15th or after, or do you have any percentages? Is it like, you know, do a majority of them file by the April 15th deadline or before? What are the trends that you typically see with the filing of tax returns by EITC recipients?
Thank you, Senator Rajal, for that question. You know, we don't generally just monitor those processing or the filing of returns by those individuals who have EITC. We do, what I can say, and I'm just trying to pull up our refund liability report. I know we did submit the refund liability report for the month of July, just this last Friday, but here we go. So I'm going to pull up. So I believe that most especially in this last year, what we saw was that well, first of all, the majority of people that file early are those individuals that have refunds. So usually we'll start seeing people on day one, and like for example, in this past February 12, when we opened up the ability for people to start filing, I think on that particular day, we had over 10,000 filers or tax returns filed on the first day. And so historically, perhaps we've seen maybe somewhere between 70 to upwards of 80,000 actual tax filings. As of the date that was, as of the July refund liability report, we have a total of 61,366 total returns filed out of a potential perhaps upwards again of 80,000 total. Usually we do see that there are stragglers, meaning that even beyond the filing date, the extended filing date or the extended due date of October 15. So even after then, there are still people who file a return. Usually it's those people with complicated returns, that don't have all the information, but again, or who owe taxes. So a lot of times, again, the majority of people who are due refunds do file on time. And in fact, we see, a lot of that. In fact, when we compare, just real quickly, I was trying to compare how much we have paid out year over year from August, in terms of refunds, from August to in comparison with where we were just in last year in July 29. So as of August 2, and of course that's a few weeks ago, as of August 2 for this particular fiscal year, in terms of refunds plus interest, and this is all tax refunds that have been paid, we paid out $204.8 million in refunds and interest, and that is through August 2, 2021. As of July 29, and again, of course, year to year, the weeks may not exactly align, but it's around the same time. As of July 29, which again is approximately around the same time frame, we paid out just shy of $68.2 million in interest, in refunds and interest. And so, what we're seeing, I think there's several things happening. One, of course, we saw that because of the EIP payments and because of EIP being based on either a 2019 or 2018 return, as we saw before, we saw there was, of course, an increase in people wanting to file their returns. And again, that's something that we saw as well in 2021 for those individuals who file. So we're seeing, again, if we say there's a total of, if we say there's a total of about 70,000 returns that will be filed, then as of end of July, we have almost 86%. If we say, and again, if we say it's about 80,000, that's like 75. So we're somewhere between 75 to 85% of the returns that usually get filed being filed already as of last month. And if we look at, sorry, I was trying to pull up the refund liability report from last year. What we have seen is that there's definitely been an increase in terms of the number of returns. I believe that we were well below that when we compare in the prior year. So again, again, we're seeing an increase in the number of people filing earlier. Perhaps it's due to the fact that people, recognize that there's a need to file their returns for the purpose of refunds. The other thing is for the purpose of, like, if there was cash assistance programs as well. But yeah, we were seeing more people file early, and usually, again, the people who have EITC or some other credit that are due a refund, they will file sooner.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Clinton.
Mr. Chair, I just want to go back to, get some information regarding PUA. So how much did PUA contribute to the economy overall? So this question can go towards BBMR as well as OFB. I guess beginning with OFB.
I can answer for the calendar year 2020, it was just about exactly 500 million was paid out in PUA claims. I'm not sure what the current year payments are.
Mr. Byrne tells me it's somewhere north of $800 million currently in total.
And how much of that came in as revenue for the government?
Senator, the PUA program allowed people to opt into a 10% withholding. It wasn't compulsory. They had to opt into that amount. And it varied obviously from period to period because they had the ability to change whether they had it withheld or not. Per month, if you're asking me for an average per month, it was of the order of 4 or 5 million a month.
For the total of how many months, so that we can get an estimate then?
Well, the PUA payment started, I believe, in July of 2020.
And it ended March 2021, is that correct?
Well, no. There were two stages, and Mr. Hiles knows a little bit more about this. But the PUA and the FPUC payments started in July, but the enhanced payments stopped. You recall there was a regular unemployment payment and an enhanced unemployment payment. And I believe and I would have to check this, but I believe the enhanced unemployment payments ended at the end of the calendar year.
Okay, and are you also including FPUC, the whole unemployment
That
insurance?
was what I was referring to, Senator, yes.
Because, yeah, I want to go back to the question that Mr. Hiles had mentioned, that the federal contracting can potentially offset any reductions in federal government programs. And so I know in your previous presentation, I think you mentioned, Mr. Hiles, that you mentioned that in 2019 we received or expected to receive 1.9 billion in federal contracts, in 2020 3.1 billion, and in 2021 3.5 billion. And you estimate about 10% of that we can recoup in revenues. So I just wanted to verify that information, whether there is an offset or what would be the outcome if we were to collect the full amount, or is there going to be a surplus?
The information on the 2021 year-to-date 3.5 billion is amounts obligated, so that the federal government is committed to making that money available. And things such as payments for federal wages, retirements, and so on are paid on a continuing basis. But some of that money is for DoD contracting, and those obligations are not necessarily, they could extend over multiple fiscal years. So the timing is not exactly known. On average of funds spent in the economy, there's, compared to total revenues in the economy, to the general fund revenue, about 10% of the business receipts come back to the government of Guam in terms of revenue. However, if funds are awarded to the government to offset an existing expense, such as earned income credit expenses that were previously paid by the government, then that's a 100% savings for the government. So the different flows of funds can have quite a different effect.
Can you provide a breakdown or a scenario of what we would expect to receive for this amount to federal contracts?
I could probably come up with an estimate. I don't have it here, but that would depend a lot on the timing of when the projects are implemented.
And that 10%, is that coming from corporate withholding, or is that also BPT related?
That would be all sources, corporate, employee withholdings, and GRT.
So this question is to Director Shimizu. So how much have we collected so far from the federal contracting? If you, as far as the 2019, do you have those, the breakdown?
In terms of federal contractor payments, so, and of course, this is an issue that has come up because the issue of federal contractor payments, right? When we do receive monies, for example, even say we isolated a specific taxpayer who's a federal contractor, you know, with regards to a filing, like when you file a BPT return or when you file an income tax return, the amount of the amounts of income or revenues or receipts that are reported, of course, it is not specified or broken down by source of funding, meaning whether it's a local contract or a federal contract, right? So there is some level of kind of complication in terms of trying to identify exactly how much a specific taxpayer may have in terms of revenues that is generated specifically from a federal contract. And again, that's, you know, something difficult to decipher.
All right, so I guess another question then is, how much are we expect to be reimbursed for the payouts for ACTC within this fiscal, or within this year? This can go for Director Shimizu.
For FY2021?
Yes.
So likely it's around the $20 million range, ma'am, and that is just at the current levels. I don't have the total amounts, but just hold on just if I can get back to you in a few minutes with regards to that number, Senator Perez. I was just provided an update, but usually in terms of our budgeting, we do rely upon, of course, our ACTC reimbursements, and those account for approximately $2 million, which, you know, of course, equates to approximately 10% of what gets reimbursed, and so we expect it to be about the 20 million range.
If I may, Senator Perez, the snapshot that we gave you, page 3, footnote number 3, we give you the amount of ACTC reimbursements. I think we're going to be expecting one more for the last quarter. So the information is there.
And where does that go? So when it comes in, where does it go to?
By statute, 90% goes back into income tax refunds and 10% goes to the operations of the Department of Revenue and Taxation.
Okay, thank you. And in regards to surplus, so last budget cycle, there was a $19 million surplus. Can you explain how that happened, both either to BBMR or OFB?
Senator, I think the 19 million was an excess of revenues over budgeted revenues, because the surplus was more like 34 million that was reported in the financial statements.
Do you have any idea where that came from? Or how did we get more than what we expected?
Well, you'd have to go into the detail of every fund and every fund source. And it was a mixture of all sorts of funds contributed to it. You know, as Mr. Guerrero says, all these are estimates. It would be surprising indeed if revenues simply came at what was the budgeted amount. And I think he also said, you know, if we get a surplus or an increase in revenues, that's a good thing too. I think when he was talking about, that's what he said. So, you know, I could certainly analyze it for you fund by fund, but I don't have that information at this moment.
Okay, the question is to OFB2. How do we end up with a $19 million surplus, if you have any ideas?
Can you repeat the question, Senator? I'm sorry.
So it's stated that we had a $19 million surplus last budget. Can you explain why that happened or how that happened?
It's Senator, I'm doing my best guess. I believe it's a combination of excess revenues and operational savings in operation. If you're asking me each specific category, I don't have that information, and we can pull it out in the audit. But you know, that's how what I was surmised that's how the surplus was generated.
And PUA? The expectation of PUA?
Are you talking about savings, or are you talking about the total cost of PUA?
Oh, no, the surplus. So did PUA factor into that surplus, unaccounted PUA?
I would think, Senator, yes, to some degree, because PUA is part of the revenues, part of withholding category. So I'm sure somewhere down the line it is probably considered and was a factor in the savings.
Senator, if I could refer you to page 128 of the audit, it shows for the general fund at 100 only, the variances between the budgeted amounts and the actual amounts. And for the general fund 100 only, there was a surplus of revenues of 25 million, and it came from like 21 million from corporate tax, 22 million from withholding taxes, and a deficit of about 20 million on BPT.
All right, I don't no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator Shelton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to continue to discuss the business privilege tax. I know there's been a lot of discussion over the last few days, and I don't mean to belabor the topic, but there is a big variance between the number that our Office of Finance and Budget and BBMR have presented to us. And I do appreciate, Mr. Carlson, the information that you have provided, the lower number that you're seeking for us to come together on. And I was hoping, OFB, if you can help us remember what our projections were last couple of years, if you can take us back to 2019 and 2020, what our projections were from your office compared to what we brought in, and if you can do the same for us too from BBMR. And I understand that there are many different factors this time around, this year, that we are facing. So I'm hoping that with this historical context, what we've experienced over the last couple of years, combined with these factors, we'll be able to make a better decision of the number we're going to agree on for this budget. Mr. Guerrero.
Thank you, Senator. I'll go back to maybe fiscal year 2019. If you all recall, 2019 was a very robust year for Government of Guam, actually for the island. Economy was good. Tourism, we hit the historic number of tourists coming to Guam at 1.6 million. That itself drew In one fund alone, the Tourist Attraction Fund, up to, I believe, $44 million. Never before once a chain. I believe the economy was just good in 2019. Everything seems to be on up and up. Employment was good. People were out spending. We had military activity here on Guam. Tourism were up. People were employed. So, taking 19 as a good year, we move on to 2020. Again, we were projecting, robust revenue collections. And if you recall the first 4 or 5 months, actually the first 4 months of fiscal year 20, we were like rolling in, revenues in the government of Guam for the first four months, from October to December. We had record-breaking collections in revenue categories. Then, of course, the inevitable happened in February, which all of a sudden started, doing a drastic turn in terms of revenue collections. By March, we saw a drastic cut in our monthly collections. And whoever thought, something like the pandemic would even hit Guam. So taking those things into account, by the end of the year, we were able to manage and keep afloat simply because influx of federal assistance dollars that just kept us up there, not seeing any real drastic changes other than the fact that we did see decreases in government revenues, but it was supported also by federal assistance. In doing 2021, again, because we already knew what was happening, we took the COVID into consideration. We knew that we saw a reduction in tourism. And tourism alone, actually, in 2020, really was a tall tale. We recorded 1.6 million tourists in 2019. In 2020, we saw half of that amount. I believe it was 832,000, something like that. And here we are in 2021. If you recall, numbers coming out from GVB officials saying that very optimistic, they're hoping to see at least 70,000. I think their initial projection before we did the 21 budget was, 400,000. They reduced it down to 200,000. And then they came up, later and says, we're going to hope we get 70,000 tourists. And that's from 1.6 million just 2 years ago. Half of that a year ago. So, considering those type of events and issues that we were facing, we figured, okay, well, let's just not take the worst case scenario, but just consider what our trend is. And taking everything into account, when we did the 2021 budget, I'm just thinking that, gosh, it was hard to predict what was going to happen. And we went on whatever information we knew at the time. Case in point, like PUA. When we bought online revenues, we didn't know that PUA was going to be extended beyond December. And if you look at the current revenues now, the current revenues are actually in the general fund, I believe, is hovering about 10 or 11 million above estimates. And I would like to think that PUA continues to federal assistance actually, how federal dollars continue to support local operations and government revenues. And a lot of the federal dollars being afforded to Guam is to replenish or to replace what was lost in government revenues. It's again going into 2022. There's a lot of uncertainties. We can just do the best of what we know today, and hopefully that things go for the better. But again, case in point, our tourism industry has taken a drastic hit, and that's what some of the economists told me, that tourism alone, Guam, I believe, contributes about $1.6 billion to our economy. And if that's gone, I mean, you can figure that if we lost 1.6 billion, that is a severe impact to our economy across the board, from employment to spending to just paying power bills, water bills. It's going to take an effect. It's going to have an effect.
Thanks, Mr. Guerrero. Director Guerrero, I do appreciate all of that. all of those reminders of what we're faced with today, what we're dealing with, and the differences. But can you tell us, can you clarify, in the 2019 budget and in the 2020 budget, what did OFB recommend to us as a body to adopt as the BPT revenue, and what was the actual collection?
Give me a moment, Senator. I'll pull out the information.
And I have the same question for you, Mr. Carlson. Director Carlson, if you can give us that information. What was the recommendation of BBMR, and what was the actual collection? And if you want to speak to all of those factors as well that we just discussed with Mr. Guerrero, please do so.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Last year, if you recall, when we had budget discussions, we agreed on every revenue level. In particular, BPD was adopted at $304 million. The only concerns that we had last year was $7 million, and I think it was 5 in corporate and 2 in individual, but we agreed on a revenue estimate of $304 million, all things being considered. Remember, this was passed in the summer of 2020, late summer, and I did provide you guys with a snapshot of July showing that to date we have collected $229, almost $230 million in just the gross receipts portion of the BPT revenue, and that we're tracking $285 million for this fiscal year. I was very appreciative of the speaker's concluding remarks yesterday before we recessed for the storm, where she made mention of the fact that to date we have this revenue already received despite closures, despite restrictions, despite tourism kind of not really being a factor, military visits and military spending in the hotels, and the quarantine has been a factor with respect to BPT as it is associated with tourism and hotel occupancy. But I thought the speaker's comments were on point, that despite the obstacles, despite the economic situation, the reality of the situation is before you. We actually are on pace to collect in this fiscal year $285 million in just the GRT portion of BPT. The speaker took Mr. Byrne and I aside yesterday after we concluded and said, could you please give us a number? Because I did say there's upward adjustment that I think can be made. So I conferred with Director Shimizu and Director Byrne, and our number is $280 million. Despite the current circumstances, I think that we've weathered everything quite well. I don't want to repeat the eloquence of the speaker's statements yesterday, but that coupled with Mr. Hiles's military contract and his observation of the Medicaid match requirements that we don't have to deal with. There is just a substantial amount of federal and cessation of matching requirements that we have that are leading towards a $280 million number. And again, Mr. Guerrero and his staff has come up with a budget that has income tax with corporate income tax, individual income tax, corporate income tax, and withholding tax at levels that we agree with. And we just don't have an agreement on BBT. So for the record, $280 million is what we believe is shown, demonstrated, and achievable.
Thank you for that.
Okay, Senator, for FY 2019, for the BBT, we estimated at $291 million. What actually came in collection was 314, so there's a variance of about $23 million. In 2020, we projected 314 million for BBT, and we collected only 296, which was an $18 million shortfall. Bear in mind that when we budgeted on 2020, we also were budgeting it based on 1.6 million tourists coming to Guam from the previous year. There was no known idea or concern, or never anybody thought of pandemic happening. So we thought that 1.6 was a good number to go with, and that's what we estimated. But again, in reality, after 2019, we experienced actually an $18 million shortfall in BBT. So going forward now in 2021, we took that into consideration. We were still somewhat conservative, and yet we're probably, I believe, in the range of, I think, 10 million, I believe, right now, as we're based on the CER report. It's tracking about 10 million short in 20. And in 20 right now, just to, let me correct myself, and currently what we're tracking is about 19 million short in BBT.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guerrero. I have one question for Director Shimizu. As of your last release from the department regarding tax refunds, we're releasing tax refunds up until April 25th, 2021. Can you tell us how far along we are with processing? Are you paying out the tax refunds as quickly as you are processing, or have you processed much further than April 25th and you're waiting for the funds to hit to pay these out?
Thank you, Senator Shelton, for that question. And hopefully this also answers some of Senator Sabina Perez's questions. I was just kind of quickly doing a comparative of July 20, where we were in July 2020 versus July 2021. And it's kind of difficult to answer that question without kind of providing some historical comparison. So where we were in July 2020 is total returns that were filed as of that time. This is current year returns, meaning 2019 income tax returns, was 44,199. Where we were in July 2021, in terms of current year returns filed, we had 61,366. That's an increase of 17,000 returns. So we saw 17,000 more returns filed year over year when we compare July 21 to July 2020. In terms of total that is processed and paid, as of July 2020, in current year refunds, we paid out and processed 9,041 returns. And that was, again, current year. In terms of 2020 refunds that have been paid as of July 2021, we paid out 42,090. That's an increase of 33,049 returns. So that means, again, that we paid out 33,000 more refunds in terms of taxpayers, or 33,000 more taxpayers, I guess, and those tax filings could be a joint return, a single filer return. That's an increase of 366%. In terms of refunds processed awaiting payment, as of July 2020, we had just shy of 28,869 refunds processed awaiting payment. As of July 2021, we have in current year returns only 4,965 refunds processed awaiting payment. Now, we did have, and if you look year to year, and I could provide this information to you, so you have it in front of you, in terms of estimated unprocessed returns, there was an increase. In July 2020, we saw there was 3,138 versus July 2021, there was 6,801. I would say just kind of, I guess anecdotally, we think that it's really because right now we're seeing an increase in amended returns due to the exclusion of the 10,200 in unemployment. And if you recall, what happened was we opened up the filing of returns, I believe, in Feb 12. And then in March, President Biden had announced, of course, that $10,200 of unemployment was excludable from income. And by that time, there were several thousands of returns that were already filed. So right now, what we're seeing in terms of processing is that, I know I was talking with Director Byrne about this, and what's been really wonderful is that over the last 2.5 years, we've really worked very closely to make sure that we work to pay, at least within the one consistently. So likely, I think outside of a few kind of periods here and there, we've really been paying very consistently, probably on a weekly basis for the most part, again, outside of a few anomalies. Of course, that has a lot to do with, of course, we've been working to try to make sure we're making consistent payments. Where we are in terms of processing is we are at the end of April, coming into beginning of May, I believe. And so there is still some work that has to be done, but basically, as we're processing now, we're pretty close to where, as we process, we're paying. And again, that has a lot to do with the coordination between DOA, BBMR, and DRT in terms of trying to just make sure that we are where we need to be.
And Senator, if I may, I'd like to confirm that. We work very closely. We compare week on week what gets processed and what gets paid. And that actually also includes the amounts that we're paying out in respect of prior year filings, if, for whatever reason, if people file late. And we've been able to accommodate those payments too.
Thank you very much. So we're processing just as quickly as we're paying out. It sounds like very up to date. End of April, beginning of May, and the last batch came out from April 25th. This is obviously a very impressive increase since last year, so I want to commend the department and DOA as well for all of the work that you're doing to get these out in a timely manner. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Real quickly, ma'am, just to give you the answer to your initial question. 2019, the adopted level for BPT was $311,528,514. We actually exceeded that in collections in 2019. We collected $312,532,666. For FY20, we adopted a level, as Mr. Guerrero mentioned, $314,890,009. And as Mr. Guerrero mentioned, we did collect $295,521,221. And again, I will remind everybody that that was during the pandemic. And in fiscal 21, this body did adopt a level of $304,439,509. And to date, as reflected in the snapshot of the CRER, we've collected $229,877,703.
Thank you very much, Director Carlson. And I know last year we, between BBMR and OFB, we had that $7 million difference that we could not agree on. But is it correct to say in 2019, your projection was also $311 million, and that was the amount that we adopted together with OFB?
1 second, let me just, because now it doesn't recognize my face anymore. Funny phones. The recommended level, we had a couple. They were actually kind of high because of where we were. I think we ended up with being in total agreement with OFB for 2019 at the $311 million mark. I don't recall that we've had any disparity in BPT with OFB. in prior years, and this is probably just the first year that we've had a slight disagreement. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to you both for the information.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. It is now 12:07. We're going to go ahead and recess, as I know we have a meeting that many of us would like to attend that's being facilitated by the congressman with regards to the hospital. So we will recess until 3 p.m.